Program Director Phillip Musegaas and Watershed Program Director Kate Hudson will now begin. Please note all attendees are on mute, but you can ask questions at any time by typing them into the question box on your webinar panel. Without further ado, Kate and Phillip, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Dana. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Phillip Musegaas. I'm the Hudson River Program Director at Riverkeeper, and I'm joined here by Kate Hudson, who runs our Watershed program at Riverkeeper as well. And so we're going to team up today and give you a fairly in-depth presentation about the risks of shipping crude oil in the Hudson Valley. We're going to talk about shipping by rail and shipping by barges and tankers down the Hudson River itself. And we're going to split up our time. So I'm going to start off and give you an overview of this ongoing oil boom that we're in the middle of now. I'm going to talk about how the oil is moved around the country, where it's coming from, the two kinds of oil that we're concerned about, and kind of tee up some of the risks that we're facing by having this oil boom in our midst and this virtual pipeline in our midst. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kate, and she's going to talk in a little more detail about particular oil terminals and other facilities in the Hudson and the particular risks that we're facing on the Hudson River. We're gonna move pretty quickly, and then we want to make sure we save time for you all to ask us questions and make sure we have time to have a good online discussion. So I'm just going to start out. You're looking at the cover slide now. That's a picture of the Stena Primorsk, which is a very large oil tanker that's actually ran aground on its maiden voyage down the Hudson a couple of years ago. So that's just one of the risks we're facing. There are much larger vessels that are carrying this crude oil. And, of course, if you have a spill from a larger vessel, you have a larger spill. So just something to think about as we go in here. We're going to start out with some basics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of crude oil, or what is crude oil, what is the virtual pipeline that you'll hear us referring to and you'll see us talking about on our website. Obviously, what are the risks that we're facing from this increased volume of oil and from these particular types of oil that we're dealing with now, which are something you'll hear us probably say a few times today, is that these are new types of oil being shipped down the Hudson by rail and by tanker. We have not had crude oil shipped through the state of New York and down the Hudson Valley before. And I'll talk a little more in detail about that a little bit later. And then, of course, we're going to kind of pivot to talking about what Riverkeeper has been doing to address these risks and to try and reduce them, and what you all can do to help us and to work with us and engage on this issue. Crude oil is what you would expect. It's unrefined petroleum products that are extracted from the ground. This includes crude oil from fracked shale deposits, and those best known example of that is from what's called the Bakken crude oil formations in North Dakota. And then we also have, and we are also facing the prospect of dealing with Canadian tar sands oil, which I think for anyone that's heard or read about the Keystone XL pipeline and this tar sands oil boom in Canada, and this is in Alberta and the kind of Rocky Mountain West area of Canada, you'll get a sense of what we're talking about. One key fact to think about here at the beginning is that crude oil is very different than home heating fuel, diesel fuel, gasoline, other kinds of refined petroleum products that have already gone through a refinery and are ready for end use. Those kinds of products have been shipped up and down the Hudson River for a very long time. And, of course, as Riverkeeper patrolling the Hudson, we've of course been concerned for a long time about the general risks related to shipping heating oil or diesel fuel down the river. But until this big oil boom happened, we were not looking at the volumes and just the sheer amount of oil that was being shipped, and this particularly dangerous and polluting kind of oil that we're facing because of shipping crude oil. Something else to think about, and I'll show you a map here in a minute, is that in the U.S. and Canada, the sources of crude oil, as I mentioned, North Dakota and Alberta in Canada, those sources are located very far away from refinery areas. Most refineries for oil in the United States and even in Canada are located on the coasts and in the Gulf of Mexico, and some on the Great Lakes around Chicago. So the result of this is they have to move this crude oil very long distances from remote areas in the upper Midwest and in the middle of Canada out to ships and eventually to refineries. And so that's why we're seeing this long transport of oil by rail, and then we're seeing the Hudson River used as a corridor for shipping oil down out to the Atlantic and up to Nova Scotia, down to Philadelphia and to refineries in Jersey, and even down to the Gulf. This next slide really is just to give you an introduction to the two kinds of crude oil that we're most concerned about. And as you'll see, they look very different. They are very different. Bakken crude, that's the oil that's being extracted from North Dakota. That's what's called a light sweet crude. That is basically a more typical kind of crude oil where it's thinner. If you have a spill of Bakken crude oil into water, it generally will float on the surface of the water, or most of it will. The big risk and the big concern about Bakken crude is you have the typical oil spill concerns in the environment, but you also have the concern because Bakken crude is volatile. It's very explosive. It has a very low match point temperature, so it will catch on fire at a very low temperature, and it's very unstable. And so some of the terrible train accidents that we're going to talk about, and some of those shipping accidents we're going to talk about that have already happened over the last couple of years have involved Bakken crude oil, including the terrible accidents in Quebec that killed dozens of people. So Bakken has a public safety and an explosive fire risk attached to it. Tar sands oil, on the other hand, as you can see from the pictures, is almost more like a tar or an asphalt consistency, very thick, very kind of gritty, almost like literally like an asphalt or again, very heavy, thick crude. The concern with that is you have the typical oil spill concerns, but the main concern is that type of oil, if it's spilled into the environment, if it's spilled into something like the Hudson River, it is going to sink to the bottom of a waterway. It's not going to float on the top and be able to be skimmed off the surface. And we'll talk more about the challenges with responding to oil spills of these two different kinds. But the important thing to remember here is Bakken crude is explosive, it's volatile. Tar sands crude is very, very difficult, almost impossible to clean up, and will have catastrophic environmental effects. Both of these, any kind of oil spill is going to have a terrible environmental effect, but the tar sands heavy crude, we often call it sinking oil, is going to have a whole different dimension of environmental impact. On this next slide, as I mentioned, this kind of gives you a sense of where the oil is coming from. You'll see in the picture that the little area on the upper left of the map that has an arrow saying Bakken Shale. This is a satellite photo showing basically giving you a sense of how large these oil fields are in North Dakota that are producing this oil. And the light source that you see on the map is actually the lights from the natural gas from the oil wells being actually flared off. They basically divert the methane gas, and that's burned because they don't have pipelines or other ways of capturing that natural gas and using it. So these oil fields are so large that you're seeing what's the equivalent of light from a small or medium-sized city you're seeing coming from these oil fields. You can see the lights and the references to Minneapolis and Chicago and Denver on that map. And again, as I mentioned before, the refineries were built on the coasts. These particular oil supplies are located in the middle of the country, in the middle of the continent. So what we're faced with is an oil boom that's producing huge volumes of crude oil. They need to get it to market. They need to get it to refineries. And their default way of doing that, the quickest, most efficient way to do that, is to load it onto trains and get it out to the coasts and to refineries as quickly as possible. And it's this boom that is causing the problems. As we're going to talk about later, the tanker cars that they're using to ship this oil by rail are not designed to carry the kind of oil they're carrying, and that's what's causing these terrible accidents, and that's what's presenting us with these what we think are unacceptable risks to our environment and to our communities. This slide, we've got a lot going on here, but this is essentially just to give you a sense of the top two graphs to show you what the increase in oil production is. And when I say an oil boom, we're not kidding. We're talking about a dramatic, significant increases in oil production. You'll see the chart on the left, which is the Bakken oil field production from 2007 to 2013, almost quadrupling, I think over quadrupling in volume. So this is a dramatic increase in oil production. Again, once this oil comes out of the ground, they need to get it to market, to refineries, and then to sell the refined product. And so the companies that are doing the extraction and shipping the oil, their sole goal is to get this oil moved across country. You'll also see on the right-hand side on the top just an increase in the actual number of carloads of crude oil that have been shipped by rail, and a dramatic increase there. Just to give you a number to put this in perspective, the Association of American Railroads, which is an industry group, said that the number of carloads of oil has grown from 9,500 a day in 2008 to 400,000 in 2013. So you can't get much more extreme than that. And the map at the bottom of this slide that you're looking at kind of gives you a sense of some of the routes we're talking about. Shows you the Bakken formation. Talks a little bit about the where the refineries are located. What Kate is going to talk about later, and what you'll see on this map, is this major United States rail line that comes east from North Dakota through Chicago, and then through the up into New York. The terminus for that, or a key crossroads for that oil, is Albany, and that is where our attention is focused now. And then so you've got enormous volumes of oil coming by train to Albany, and then you have some of that oil continuing by train down the west side of the Hudson River, literally running very close to the Hudson River in many cases, by rail down to refineries. And we also have terminals in Albany that transfer the oil from trains onto barges and tankers to ship it down the Hudson to those same refineries. So once it reaches Albany, you've still got more rail shipping, but you've also got then the shipping on the river itself that we're concerned about. Some quick facts, some names to kind of put in your head to remember when you read about this going forward and you hear us talk about it. The Canadian Pacific and CSX are railroad companies that own and operate these railroads through northern New York. CSX runs down the Hudson Valley into New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. And as I mentioned just before, Albany has emerged as a key port and a key hub for the transfer of this crude oil, both continuing on rail down the Hudson River and then transferring it onto vessels. And the two companies that Riverkeeper is focused on right now, because they have some permit applications out, it's a company called Global Partners and a company called Buckeye. And they have terminals in Albany that we are concerned about, because they want to change the use of these terminals to allow them to transfer and store this heavy crude oil that we're concerned about for the first time in Albany. There's also a similar proposal by Global at another terminal in Newburgh that would do the same thing, that would increase the volume of heavy crude coming through Newburgh. So we're not just talking about Albany at this point, we're also talking about Newburgh and specifically New Windsor. Crude oil transport by train, just again, we're kind of give you an overview of the risks we're talking about and the concerns. Something that struck us early on when I think especially after a train accident in North Dakota and an explosion and fire in North Dakota following a Bakken train derailment, the workers that operate these trains, the conductors, the engineers that drive these trains, commonly refer to them as bomb trains. And this would be a joke if it were funny, but this is really it's an indication of how high the safety risks are, even by the people that are operating these trains themselves, and how they feel that their lives are at risk when they're running these trains. As I talked about a little bit before, Bakken crude oil is much more volatile, much more explosive than typical crude. And the particular concern we have with the crude oil is it being shipped by rail is that they are putting this Bakken oil into these what are called DOT 111 railroad tank cars. And if you've been through Albany recently, you've been down the west side of the Hudson through Kingston or even through Nyack or Haverstraw, and you've seen these long trains. We'll have a photo in a minute here for you. You see these long trains that have these big black tanker cars. That's what we're talking about. And these tanker cars that are in wide use are completely inadequate and completely unsafe when it comes to shipping this volatile Bakken crude oil by rail through the Hudson Valley and across the country. And to give you a sense of this, there are 92,000 of these tanker cars in use across the country right now. 78,000 out of those 92,000, 85% of them, everyone in the industry and government has acknowledged that those rail cars are unsafe. And yet they continue to use them and they continue to ship this oil in these tanker cars around the country, through Albany, through Kingston, through our communities and down the Hudson River. I'm going to go through a couple slides and just give you a sense of some of the accidents and some of the impacts of these dangerous oil shipping that we're talking about. The most infamous and tragic of these was a train derailment and explosion in a small town in Quebec called Lac-Megantic, which happened in July of last year. The train was actually basically being stored overnight just outside of town. They didn't set the brakes properly, and the train literally rolled into town around, I think, 12:45 in the morning and derailed and exploded in the middle of this small tourist town, and it literally incinerated an entire area of the downtown, and that killed 47 people. And that, of course, I think inevitably marred this particular community, and this was a preventable accident. Many of these accidents are preventable. Aliceville, Alabama, and we're kind of doing these in chronological order, as you'll see. Aliceville, Alabama, another Bakken oil train derailed, and in a large wetland area in the middle of Alabama. One of our sister organizations, the Hurricane Riverkeeper, was on the scene and took a whole series of photographs, and there's some amazing footage and news stories online about this particular spill. But as we know, the initial response to this spill was inadequate. They didn't really know what kind of oil they were dealing with. They didn't clean it up properly, and we're just quoting from a news article here. 4 months after that spill occurred, there's still dark, smelly crude oil oozing from the ground, oozing into this wetland. So this is an ongoing environmental disaster in Alabama. 4 months after the accident, this is still not being addressed. And so that gives you a sense. You can see the wrecked oil cars in the photo here. You can see the oil clearly floating on the surface. This is what we're facing in the Hudson Valley, and these are the risks that we're concerned about. Another explosion and derailment was in Casselton, North Dakota in December. You can see just the vast scale of this and how explosive this Bakken crude oil is. You can see the train cars at the bottom of the photograph here and the size of the fireball from this derailment. This happened to, I suppose, fortunately happened out in the countryside, and so this, this giant fireball and the smoke and the fire did not immediately injure or kill anyone, but it required the evacuation of I think about 5,000 people in a nearby community, and this resulted in about 400,000 gallons of oil being spilled into the environment, in addition to the explosion and the fire that ensued. Just a big picture again, just to give you a sense of how much oil we're talking about and the correlation between this oil boom and what we're seeing in terms of spills and impacts on the environment. From 1975 to 2012, oil spills from trains, there was about 800,000 gallons spilled. In 2013 alone, over 1 million gallons of oil spilled from train accidents carrying crude oil. So the oil boom has impacts. That's leaving spill response aside, if you're going to increase the volume and you're going to ship oil across country on in some cases, tracks that haven't been inspected in a long time, train cars and switch yards that have not been inspected in a long time or are not in good shape, and you're using tanker cars that are known to be unsafe, you're going to have accidents and you're going to have spills, and that's what we're seeing here with these numbers. I'm going to talk a little bit, switch gears now from the rail shipping, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some, give you some examples of some marine oil spill accidents that have happened remarkably in the last 2 months with this continuing oil boom that's been going on. The Mississippi River in February, 65 miles of the river was closed after a 31,000 gallon spill of crude oil. This was caused from a barge crash. A barge was run into by a ship, and the oil spill into the Mississippi in a very, very highly trafficked, economically important area of the Mississippi River, and that shut down the Mississippi for several days. Galveston Bay, you may have all seen this in the news in literally the last week or so. 168,000 gallons of fuel oil. This is heavy, I think what they call bunker fuel. This type of oil is not the Bakken crude that's very explosive and dangerous. This is probably a little more similar to the tar sands oil that I talked about at the beginning. Very thick, very tar-like substance. And this awful photo that you're seeing is a dead bird that was covered in oil and could not recover. So we are seeing that was in this spill happened in Galveston Bay, literally less than a couple miles from these very large Audubon bird sanctuaries and national wildlife sanctuaries during the early part of the spring bird migration season. So the potential impacts of this are still unfolding, but again, when we think about the Hudson River, and Kate's going to talk about this, think about all the sensitive habitats and all the work that's been done on the Hudson River over the last few decades to restore habitat, to create habitat, and we've seen bald eagles and we've seen all kinds of birds return to the Hudson. We can't afford to have a spill like this happen on the Hudson River next to Iona Island or in Haverstraw Bay or anywhere that's where we have sensitive habitat.
So thank you, Philip, for taking us this far. I want to bring it home to the Hudson Valley, which is home for many of us, most of us. And it is not a question of whether a spill or an accident or an explosion is going to happen. It's when. Clearly you can see from the record that this industry has had in other places. We've been lucky, but we should not be relying on luck, and it will certainly not serve us well in the long term. Just to give you a sense of the amount of crude that is traveling through the Hudson Valley, it is by train, vessel, and barge. In terms of trains, they are coming down the west side of the Hudson from Albany. And when we refer to unit trains, that is the term for the 80 to 120 car trains that are solely filled with crude oil. And at 30,000 gallons per car, that works out to about 2.2 billion gallons per year coming down the Hudson River in trains. And just to give you a sense of how transport has changed, it used to be that trains were mixed products, and if you had some cars that were carrying hazardous products, they were buffered on either side by grain cars or canola oil cars, so that if there was some kind of accident, it would not be involve as much release of hazardous material. That is no longer the case. These trains, these bomb trains, are solely filled with crude oil. And as I said, this oil is also coming down the Hudson River. And this is what the terminal facilities that Buckeye and Global operate in Albany are doing, and also that Global hopes to do in New Windsor and Newburgh. It is transferring oil from rail cars into barges and vessels. And one of the reasons that there are permit applications pending is because Global is seeking permission to heat oil in order to be able to accomplish that transfer. And you would not want to be heating Bakken as we know, because that would explode. And so the only oil they are looking at heating, even though they have refused to disclose even to DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, what oils they are proposing to heat, it's clearly heavy crude oil and likely tar sands oil, which they need to heat in order to be able to transfer. So we're looking at terminals up in Albany that have been authorized by DEC in 2012 to transfer 2.8 billion gallons per year from oil from trains to ships and barges, and that is moving down the Hudson River at a significant pace. We are concerned that even that amount of traffic is going to be expanded if in fact Global is able to get its permits for its Newburgh facility. And then rail would bring additional crude down to Newburgh, and then it would be loaded on barges and go down the river. In addition to the barges, there is a tanker which carries 7 million gallons of oil, and that tanker travels up and down the river from Albany through New York Harbor and to Canada and back, carrying 7 million gallons over a 7 to 10 day period. So what are the crude oil risks to the Hudson River? And these are significant. As you can imagine, a train derailment, as you saw in those photos, could result in a spill and an explosive fire in any one of the communities that lie along the west side of the Hudson. Kingston, Rockland County, Nyack. There are numerous communities that these rail cars are moving through, right through the center of town. And in fact, there was a derailment in Ulster, the town of Ulster, in an area where there was a shopping center and many people. So that would be an incredible disaster. From the perspective of the Hudson River, there really is no way to clean up a spill of crude oil in the Hudson River. And these figures are derived from a presentation that was given by the Coast Guard recently. And a successful cleanup of a Bakken crude oil spill might recover 15 to 20% of the oil out of the Hudson River. A successful spill response, if there were a tar sands crude oil spill, might recover just 5% of the oil. So being ready, even though we have to be ready, and training for this kind of disaster, which we need to do, it is still not going to prevent the disaster. And really, it is only by preventing this transport that we can protect the Hudson River. So here's what we've already seen. This is a list of the rail accidents that have occurred in New York since December of 2013. And I mean, we're really just talking about a 3-month period, and we've already had 5 accidents. None of them involved a spill or an explosion, but again, we're lucky. And our luck can run out at any time. And I think one of the things that, I don't know if others have read, that the DEC partnered with federal DOT officials and conducted inspections at 2 rail yards in Albany and touted their aggressive action. What was most concerning to me about those inspections is how many defects they found in just 6 miles of track in both the rail infrastructure and in the cars that were there. And they did not inspect the Selkirk yard. And the day after the inspections, there was an oil train derailment at the Selkirk yard. So these, again, are just accidents waiting to happen. And what is at risk in terms of the Hudson River? This is an irreplaceable waterway, as I'm sure many of you, most of you know, that many of us, Riverkeeper as an organization and many, many individuals have spent huge amounts of time and care and money to bring back from a time when it was very polluted to where it is right now. We have significant spawning fish populations that are already endangered or depleted. Sturgeons on the endangered list, and a number of other species. We have significant bird habitat. We have additional endangered fish species are shad and herring. And as I'm sure everybody knows, we have spent billions of dollars and decades cleaning up PCBs and restoring our waterfront communities and establishing public access. And this has been recognized by DEC itself, which has worked hard to designate significant habitats all up and down the river, which are considered to be irreplaceable. This is what happened to the first tanker to carry crude down the Hudson River in December of 2012. 6 miles below the Port of Albany, it ran aground and opened up a huge gash in the outer hull. The only reason this was not a disaster is because of Exxon Valdez. Post-Exxon Valdez, tankers are now required to have double hulls. And the inner hull was not punctured, and so there was no spill of product. But it taught us some very valuable lessons, not the least of which is there are no response capabilities in the upper Hudson to a spill. It took 3 hours for a Navy plane to get to the site of the spill from Massachusetts in order to determine whether there was a loss of product. There is just no ability to respond right now in the upper Hudson. Most of the response assets on the river are in New York Harbor. So I don't think I probably have to remind most of you that this threatens this transport of crude oil, and what could happen impacts numerous communities, both coming across western New York and coming down the Hudson River. And there's a number of counties that are implicated, and a number of them are becoming very active in trying to protect their citizens. Albany County recently imposed a moratorium on crude oil expansion at the global terminal, which Global turned around and said, sue us, or we'll sue you if you try and enforce that moratorium. Ulster County is very concerned and has been starting to meet with local legislators about the issue. Rockland County has its sheriffs out with their speed guns recording the speed of the trains. And these trains are going 50 miles an hour, which is one of the reasons why if anything goes wrong, it will be a disaster. They cannot stop. And one of the things that I think has been overlooked somewhat in terms of looking at, thinking about what could happen if there were a crude oil spill on the Hudson is how many communities rely on the Hudson River for their drinking water. And if there was a spill anywhere near one of these water intakes, you would be looking at a West Virginia situation where thousands and thousands of people would lose access to drinking water. In addition, there's huge potential economic impacts that a spill would have. And it not only with respect to the resources that draw people to the Hudson River Valley, tourism, recreation, but also there are a number of very big employers, significant industries, such as the IBM chip fab manufacturing site in Dutchess County that relies on water from the Hudson River. And if if contaminated water were to enter their facility or they lost access to water, there could be significant dollars of economic loss. Given all of that, Riverkeeper did not really see an alternative to taking the position that crude oil just should not be transported on the Hudson River. There is just no way to respond to a spill that would that would spare the river, and too much is at risk. And And in addition to that, we have advocated and continue to advocate for a statewide moratorium on transport of all crude oil in New York until essential safety improvements, some of the things that Phillip referred to in terms of phasing out or banning the use of the DOT 111 cars, slowing down the trains, and letting local communities know what's coming through. So they're going to be the ones on the front line if there's an accident, and they don't even know what's coming through their towns right now. And again, effective spill prevention and emergency response capabilities, but prevention is really the name of the word, because you could see with that response is just not going to spare the Hudson if there is a spill. There has been some government response to the risk. I am not going to go through all of this. At the federal level, there's a lot of voluntary warnings and cautions and advice, but none of it is binding at this point on the industry. The governor of the state of New York in the end of January issued an executive order, but really in terms of what it meant on the ground, very little. He ordered a 3-month study of emergency preparedness, and he had his state agencies write a letter to the federal government and ask them to take action. One thing that we did note, which I think is something that we should all think about and take note of, is that the New York State Comptroller's Office did an audit of the deficiencies in the state's railroad bridge inspection program. And many of the bridges that carry these crude oil bound trains across tributaries to the Hudson River date back to the turn of the century and are in incredible need of repair. So yesterday, it's very timely that we're having this webinar today, because yesterday something fairly surprising happened, and I think we were all very gratified. DEC sent 3 letters. They not only sent the letters to Global and one to the EPA administrator, they also took the unusual step of really proactively releasing them to the press, not something that DEC usually does with respect to correspondence with the permit applicants. And it was noted by the press that they took this action on the day of the anniversary of the Exxon Valdez spill, something which a press representative for the department said that they were very conscious of when they did this. And basically, the letters that they sent to Global with respect to both the Albany facility and the Newburgh and New Windsor facilities was, you have not given us enough information, and we are not going to continue to process your permit applications until you give us that information. This is a significant turnaround from DEC in November making a determination that issuing the crude oil heating permits and for the Global facility would not cause any environmental impacts. So I am told that we're running out of time, and so I will try and do this very quickly so we can have time for a few questions. There is still much that needs to be done at both the federal and the state level. We think there should be a ban on the DOT 111 cars. We need to have more realistic spill response plans. We need the state to rescind the negative declaration from November with respect to the Global facility in Albany and order full environmental reviews of what is proposed. And we, as you can see from this slide, this is much of what we are focused on, is advocating for these actions to be taken. And we are also, as we are with this webinar, trying to educate the public and decision makers. And we would appreciate your support. The letters that were released yesterday by DEC did extend the deadline for commenting on the Global permit until June 2nd. Please write letters to your local newspapers, contact your elected leaders, particularly federal, In this case, the federal electeds are probably in a better place to influence something meaningful than the state. And please follow us and support us. So I don't know whether any questions have come in, but we hope that this was helpful. It's a lot of information to absorb, I know, but I think that attention being paid by the public is what caused DEC to reverse course. It was hugely important. And I haven't mentioned this previously, but there is a, oh, I'm sorry. If you do have a question, please type your question into the question box, and then we will be able to see it. There is an environmental justice community immediately adjacent to the global facility in Albany, and these people were ignored, not only by global but also by DEC. And then finally, their elected representatives stepped up and insisted that attention be paid. And just with yesterday's letters, DEC acknowledged that there's also an environmental justice community adjacent to Global's Newburgh facilities, and they are going to do the right thing this time. DEC is going to require outreach. I believe that we have sent out an action alert, and there is an action available on our website that includes a letter or a template for a letter.
If you go to our Take Action page, go to riverkeeper.org and you go to our Take Action section. There's a tab right on the home page that will take you to that. And I think there's an action up there where you can. It's got either talking points or a suggested letter that you can use to form your own comments to send in on these terminal applications. And it looks like Dana just sent the link around. Perfect. So that's the best place to go to see what you can do with the kind of actions that Riverkeeper is calling on the public to take. You can find them there.
And we will be updating our actions because this is a very fast-moving issue, and particularly so since DEC has decided to become more proactive. So we appreciate that that you have spent the time with us today. And if you think of any other questions, feel free to email the website. Them. Yeah.
If folks have, we're still on the line now. If folks have any more questions, there we go.
The question that has been asked is whether the actions that Albany County has taken have any real teeth. And I think there's two ways to answer that. The first is, legally, does Albany County have the authority to impose a moratorium on the expansion of the global facility? And I think that that's a question that has not been answered. And I think it's a significant question. However, I also think that it was an action that stood up for the citizens of Albany County who felt as if the state was not standing up for them. And it sent a signal to Global that this community was not just going to roll over and back down. And it may, in fact, have contributed to DEC deciding that it had to be more aggressive. So there's many ways to look at an action like that.
We have a new question. I'll just paraphrase the question back. Someone asked if the supply boom you mentioned is the only reason that the crude oil is being shipped down the Hudson now, and whether were shifts in regulations or any other changes with these particular terminals, this global terminal and the Buckeye terminal we're talking about. Essentially, the oil boom in North Dakota, and I think to some extent in Canada, I think we're going to see more of the oil boom in Canada affecting us as time goes on. But the oil boom in North Dakota over the last few years is definitely, I think, the reason why we're seeing crude oil coming in such large volumes into Albany and being shipped down the river. So the short answer is yes. And I think In terms of regulations, that's a great question. I think what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that this is another situation where federal government regulations on railroad safety, the regulations that govern what kinds of tanker cars these companies can use to ship this explosive Bakken crude oil, the federal government and these regulations are way behind. I mean, they should, all else being equal, they should never have allowed this explosive Bakken crude oil to be shipped in tanker cars that they know are not designed to carry explosive materials. And so the regulations, I think, are catching up. That's why, Riverkeeper is, our attorneys and our staff is really digging in and looking at how we need to get these regulations up to speed.
And federal regulators themselves will say that they were completely surprised and completely unprepared. But the unfortunate thing is we know how ineffective Washington is in terms of actually taking action. And so we're caught in this never land. We have gotten another question. Can the town of New Windsor officials do anything to stop the expansion? The first answer is there is local approval, local zoning approval, that is required for the construction that that Global is proposing. And so in theory, they could exercise some local authority. In fact, the city of Albany was prepared to exercise some local authority with respect to the expansion at the Global terminal in Albany until Global reacted to that by withdrawing its application from the city of Albany. So Global is concerned about a local municipality that wants to impose some conditions on what they might do. I don't know whether they could stop the expansion, but they can certainly place conditions on the expansion. And they are in a position, actually, even if DEC decides not to order a full environmental review, the town of New Windsor could do so if it chose. The status of the Pilgrim pipeline it's still in the stage of being proposed. It certainly is, and I believe it's under the authority of DEC and not FERC because it's a within, or perhaps I am uncertain about that. Usually interstate pipelines are approved by the Federal Regulatory Commission. I'm not sure about this one. But the one thing I would say about the Pilgrim pipeline is there are a number of people, including the company itself, that tried to sell the Pilgrim pipeline as a way to protect the Hudson River. Because if we put the oil in a pipeline, then it won't go on the river. In fact, what has happened is, and what will happen, we believe will happen, is any and all modes of transporting crude oil will be used to the maximum by the industry. It's not in the alternative, and there's nobody in a position to force a choice. And so that whole argument is a false choice. It's going to come down the river by barge, it's going to come down the river by train, and maybe in addition by pipeline. And we've seen some serious pipeline spills recently, so that doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence. Tonight at 7 p.m., the Environmental Subcommittee of the Rockland County Legislature is asking for testimony about the potential consequences in the event of a spill in the Hudson. The meeting is in New City, and Riverkeeper will be there. So I urge any of you that might live in Rockland County or near Rockland County to try and attend that Environmental Subcommittee hearing. There's a question that I'm not sure that I completely understand. The question is, are they, and I'm not sure whether that's referring to Global or to someone else, reluctant to locate a transfer station further south because it would have to pass under West Point? Global, first of all, I should say that the number of points at which this product can be transferred from rail to vessel are very limited because it requires a deep water port. And there are very, very few deep water ports on the Hudson River. So I think that that's probably the reason why Newburgh has been proposed. It is also the case that the Global owns property there. And so that's why they had planned to move forward.
And just to add to what Kate said, something else to mention about the questioner asked about trains passing trains passing under West Point. It is important to note that the freight rail line on the west side of the Hudson River does pass under West Point, and there are trains carrying this explosive Bakken crude oil that take that route. And so these explosive bomb trains are passing underneath West Point currently. This is happening now. So that will continue whether they transfer more oil onto barges or not.
And just to clarify, the meeting, the legislative hearing in New City tonight is at 11 Hempstead Road. And we thank you for spending the time with us today and look forward to working with you on this incredibly important issue.
Thank you, Kate. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Just a reminder, this webinar, I think that the slides we've shown you and a recording of the webinar will be available. We'll have a link on our website, and we'll definitely make it available for you to watch later and to use as a reference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.